Every year, together with our colleagues from TAG, with the gracious support of USAID, we are producing, the colleagues from TAG are producing a report about financing for R&D. And there is a questionnaire going to the countries, and there is a huge amount of work, and Mike, who is here in the panel. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed, it's a very much women-driven meeting, and Mike and Mark are the only guys that were brave enough to be here with us, and I think unique at the end. And every year, this questionnaire goes around, and every year we stay with emotions. How does it look this year? In the hope that miraculously we have a new donor, a new private sector, a new government coming and putting more money. Because for many years, we are somewhere at $700 million in TB. That's 10 times more than for other diseases, and that's 3 times less than what we should have, which is around 2.3 billion a year. Every year, we literally stay like that, hoping that there is somewhere someone understanding that the more we delay the investments now, the more time we'll get for us to get any bloody tool we are looking for. So if the money are not coming in 2018 or 2019, good luck. We will not have anything in 2026, but maybe in 2028, which for many of us will not matter, but it's not about us. It will not matter for a lot of people, which by then might have lost their lives.
For MSF, multi-drug resistant tuberculosis is a medical emergency. I think we have to repeat it again. And why? It's because the reality that we face in the field with our patient is the drug-resistant TB is an impossible 2-year journey. We all know it, but we need to repeat it to ourselves. It's 14,600 pills to swallow. It's intolerable side effect, and we've heard some of the person in the first panel, including psychosis and deafness and neuropathy. It's daily painful injection. And we have a dismal cure rate of 54% for those with multi-drug resistance, and only 30% with those with extensive drug resistance TB. We are also witness to emerging epidemics, the global efforts that we had to address them. But yet, if we were to look at TB and confront it as an example of an infectious disease in the epidemic dimension, it is clear that we are pretty bad, pretty mediocre to address it. And why are we so mediocre? Well, we are one of the largest NGO right now. We're treating patients with drug-resistant TB. And last year, we treated 2,700 patients. And we see the limited option that we can offer to them. Just the 2 new drugs have been developed to treat TB in half a century. We know the name of them. One is Delaminid by Otsuka. The other one is Bedaquiline by Johnson & Johnson. Delaminid is only registered in 3 of the 30 drug-resistant TB high-burden countries, the countries that face the largest challenge confronting TB. I was in Armenia recently and saw how people like to put their life on hold to be treated. Every day they had to go to the clinic to receive the treatment. Of people who could benefit from those newer medicine, only 12% of them did last year. This is why research and development for TB is essential, why leaders around the world today need to see it as their own business. The inclusion principle that on R&D in the zero draft seems okay on principle, but that's not good enough. That is not good enough. The member state needs to send us a strong political message about funding properly R&D. To give people with drug resistance to be the best chance to cure, we need not only money, but in addition to money, we really need new regimen with novel classes of drugs, for which resistance haven't already developed. Although we know that with time, it will. The current way drugs are developed is failing patients. To properly treat TB patients, drug must be used in combination. Yet, the monopoly-based system provides little incentive to do this. As an organization of doctors, nurses, healthcare, medical staff, we have been left frustrated as thousands of patients continue to suffer from this long and toxic treatment. This led MSF to partner with Research Institute and Ministry of Health in affected countries to run trials. Why? Because we are craving to reduce treatment. We are craving to stop painful injection. and we are craving to reduce side effects. Member states and other funders of R&D should and must support collaborative research and development platforms and share clinical trial data. We have seen the impact of lack of collaboration. Precious time and resources are wasted. Random example, Sequela and Pfizer refused to allow access to all existing clinical data on promising drugs, like sutezolid. This could set back development by years to replicate the existing data. Member states must consider designating government-funded R&D as global public good, fair and equitable access. This can happen. Practical step can happen. Example, Otsuka and its commercial partners should register the laminate widely in high-burden countries. Johnson & Johnson should sign a voluntary license with Medicine Patent Pool to enable others companies to register and distribute bedaquiline. Third, for scale-up of new drugs to take place, companies also need to commit to a fair price. A price of drug-resistant TB regimen should not exceed $500 per treatment per person. Internationally recognized TB policies and guidelines from WHO is fundamental to end TB by 2030. But many countries still lagging behind. And lastly, we need to protect public health without the fear of reprisal from other countries. Given the imperative to protect public health and address the drug resistance TB emergency, government should ensure affordable access to all available resources. That means internationally agreed upon public health safeguard, the TRIPS flexibility, the compulsory licensing, and patentability criteria. Government can make a difference by using all the tools at their disposal to promote TB access for today's patient and for tomorrow's patient. Thank you.
If there is something that the UNHLM political declaration in TB should bring, is really very clear commitments on how we advance on this. And I would actually even challenge ourselves that if the political declaration, for whatever reason, is not in the right shape, we should just simply not have it. There is a lot of declarative support, but things are not moving. And we hear for years about things to be moved on R&D, about the need for having a new vaccine. Even I have to say there is a great initiative of the BRICS network, but I was in Brazil in 2014 when that started as well with Teresa, okay? And we celebrated, and that's 4 years ago. And it's a great beginning, but it's still a bloody great beginning. We are not advancing in terms of concretely seeing some funds put towards concrete push, and maybe simply starting by the countries committing to support clinical trials in their countries and advancing things.
My organization, Treatment Action Group, we advocate for the research we need to end the TB epidemic. We're committed to this because we've seen firsthand the powerful effect that scientific advances can have in changing the course of an epidemic and in saving lives. TAG was founded in New York City in the early 1990s when New Yorkers affected by HIV came together to expand and accelerate research into HIV and its major co-infections, including tuberculosis. We asked for funding, for basic science, for clinical trials, and we asked to participate in shaping the scientific agenda. Advocacy by TAG and our partners played a key role in accelerating the development of new and more powerful drugs, such as protease inhibitors, which, when used in combination with older drugs, rapidly reduced AIDS deaths. This combination therapy was powerful, but only a few people who needed it had access. So we learned that for research to really have a meaningful impact, the products of research and development have to be made available equitably to everyone in need. And our advocacy didn't stop there. Research is a central pillar of any public health response, and all along, research into TB languished. The deadly persistence of the global TB epidemic in large part reflects decades of underfunding research. This has left patients and health systems reliant on outdated and, in many cases, non-existent technologies to prevent, diagnose, and treat TB. So increasing funding for TB R&D will be essential to meet the global goals set by the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We need to accelerate progress across the full spectrum of TB research, from basic science to product development to applied health research. The Stop TB Partnership, as Luchika mentioned, has estimated that the world needs to spend over $9 billion on TB research over the next 5 years, or about $2 billion a year. For the last 12 years, Treatment Action Group has conducted a global survey to estimate just how much we actually are spending on TB research each year in relation to these targets set by Stop TB. Last year, for the first time in a long time, there was a bit of good news. Annual funding for TB R&D exceeded $700 million for the first time annually. But compared to the $2 billion needed annually, this leaves us with a $1.3 billion funding gap. This may seem like a large gap, but it is surmountable if we approach supporting TB R&D as a shared global responsibility. And action by all governments will be key. Nearly 60% of funding for TB research comes from the public sector, and of this public money, 60% of the public funding comes from the United States government. This investment by the United States has been powerful and it needs to be maintained, but to make further progress, we'll need to cultivate a wider, more diverse funding base. We need other governments to fund TB R&D at a level proportionate to what the United States gives. One proposal developed by TAG and partners is based on the idea of a fair share, so to speak. The proposal asks each country to spend up to or beyond 0.1% of its annual gross domestic expenditure on research and development, a statistic called GERD, to spend 0.1% of their overall R&D spending on TB research specifically. If the G20 nations, the TB high-burden countries, and other high-income nations devoted 0.1% of their GERD to TB R&D, we would close the funding gap. If even more countries followed suit, we could accelerate research even further. This approach to rallying public commitments applies the same percentage of GERD to all countries. So those that already spend more on R&D will give more than those still in the process of developing their national research sectors. And the approach isn't overly prescriptive. Governments can decide to combine resources with others and support international mechanisms such as the Life Prize or the AMR R&D Collaboration Hub. They can work regionally or in other groupings through, for example, the BRICS TB Research Network, or they can focus on domestic activities. The India TB Research Consortium is one standout example. Whatever approach governments take, collaboration is going to be essential. TB has to be treated using multi-drug regimens, and new vaccines may require accompanying new diagnostics. So developing these tools will require funders and developers to work together, share data, leverage expertise, and combine resources across sectors. The 0.1% GERD targets are just one approach for achieving this global solidarity and thinking through what a fair share might look like. Other proposals are welcome, but we think this is a really strong starting place for discussion. The experience of TB research over the past 10 years indicates that early public investments often attract co-funding from other sectors. So by signaling opportunity, public money may help raise resources for TB research outside of the public sector. From diagnostic tools such as GeneXpert to TB drugs such as bedaquiline and delaminid, government support proved key for these product development programs led by industry groups in the form of funding, incentives, strong regulatory systems, and the creation of research-enabling environments. And philanthropic investments have had a similarly catalytic effect. But to ensure these partnerships continue to produce innovation that saves lives, we'll need to introduce innovative financing mechanisms and think through appropriate incentive strategies. To end, I just want to reiterate that there will be no end to TB without good TB science. We urgently need increased public investments in TB R&D, a wider, more diverse funding base, new ways of working together, and an affirmation that research should be needs-driven and guided by concerns for equity. Scientific progress against TB is possible, and all people with and at risk of TB have the right to enjoy the benefits of scientific advancement, Article 15 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Thank you.
We managed to have just 2 add-on drugs in half a century. I think we should all be terrified. And it's very difficult to explain the situation to someone that is not part of our community. I'm looking at you, Cheri. And USG and USAID are the lead funders into research for TB, but also on implementation. And very often is you say that the one that is doing the most is the one the most exposed, you know, because you are always running and pushing the boundaries. And I have to recognize that if the civil society hearing is happening and we were able as at least Stop TB, but others to bring so many colleagues from the countries is because of USAID, and thank you very much. Otherwise, we would have not been able to have at least 40 civil society in the room.
I do want to thank TAG for the report that they have put out. It holds us all accountable. I think it's an accountability measure that we can rely on. And in the report, it does show that over 60% of the funding is coming from the U.S. government. And we do need more partners to come forward, more countries, more stakeholders to invest more, because it clearly isn't enough. And I'll talk about our strategy, but also talking about how we can partner with others further. So everything that we do is to achieve these objectives that we have in our USG TB strategy. So all of our research is to answer questions that will relate back to this. So this is our number one thing, is making sure that the research is linked to our targets, to our goals. We're proud to sponsor, but it's very unfortunate that only recently we have had the first results from a randomized clinical trial on MDR-TB that we're doing in collaboration with the union. Because we should have had this a long time ago. So it's great. We have hope. We have information. We can target our interventions, but it is late, and it should have happened before. I mean, to think that we're at this day and age, and we are only starting to finish the first ever randomized clinical trial on MDR-TB is really unfortunate. I think that until recently, in some countries, are still relying on the microscope for diagnosis. So, I mean, we have new hope. We have a new molecular tool that we have helped to invest in and to get access in the field. But we should have a slew of them. We should have many more, and we need that investment. We need more investments in treatments. We do have 2 new drugs, but that's not enough. I mean, agreeing with Joanne, we will have resistance to these drugs. We have hope, but how long will that last? And we need to make sure that we are securing for the next generation, for our children, our grandchildren, that we are actually going to have treatments for MDR-TB, for TB. And that's at risk if we do not invest now. So I just want to say how we use all of our resources within the U.S. government. I think it's really important to look at how we have a continuum. We work with all the different agencies that we have to really work together. And I think this is what countries need to do. They need to develop an approach. They need to be linking it to their national strategic plan, and they need to involve all the stakeholders, public and private. This only shows our public stakeholders, but if we made links to the private sector, we definitely have many of those to achieve your objectives. And so this is what countries need to do. We do partner with many of these countries. We have research with Brazil, India, South Africa, and others. But I think there is hope. We do have tools. But the most important thing is that we need more. We need this to be a shared responsibility. The U.S. government and USAID is very happy to partner with public and private sector to do more, to leverage our resources, so that we can find those new tools for the next generation and for now. Thank you.
I'm not an expert in this field. I must give this disclaimer right at the beginning, but I would like to share some perspectives from a high-burden country, and also a country which has taken on this challenge head-on and tried to make important efforts to tackle this challenge collectively. Although it has been more than 135 years since Robert Koch discovered the etiology of tuberculosis, it continues to be the leading infectious killer disease globally. It was declared as a global emergency for public health, WHO, around 25 years ago. While persistent global efforts have resulted in some progress, still about 3 million people developing tuberculosis are not diagnosed. The slow progress in meeting the challenges of TB has multiple causes. Among the most important of these causes might be the lost opportunities over the past several decades in providing adequate R&D funding for treatment of TB. The high-level event on TB planned on the sidelines of UNGA, therefore, will be a useful opportunity to do something about this particular aspect of tackling TB. The Indian leadership acknowledges the scale of challenge in our country. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has shown personal commitment and leadership to tackle TB head-on, and India plans to eliminate TB by 2025, 5 years ahead of the global target of 2030. It is to implement this vision, a national strategic plan has been made operational. R&D forms a very crucial aspect across all pillars of this national strategic plan. India has allocated 430 million US dollar for implementation of NSP in the current year, an increase of 54% over the last year. India has a long tradition of TB research. Many of us in the room would probably be aware of it. Indian Council for Medical Research, India's apex institution for biomedical research, is one of the oldest institutions undertaking TB research in the developing world. 2 months back, ICMR was awarded the 2017 Cochrane Prize for Excellent Tradition of TB Research. ICMR has a network of 32 institutions across India, of which National Institute for Research in Tuberculosis based in Chennai and National Jalma Institute for Leprosy and Other Microbacterial Diseases of Agra work specifically on TB. NIRT has conducted more than 50 randomized clinical trials in TB since 1950s. It is a WHO collaborating center for TB research and training. Pioneering studies from NIRT have demonstrated the efficacy of domiciliary treatment, which have been adopted by nearly 150 countries worldwide. 2016, an India TB Research Consortium was constituted to support the National Strategic Plan and to consolidate and align all efforts in TB care and elimination. The ITRC is a coalition of diverse stakeholders to develop new tools and to fast-track research to deliver effective diagnostics, shorter drug regimens, and vaccines. India's recent initiatives to strengthen TB research agenda through increased domestic funding, collaborative networks, and transnational research partnerships needs to be seen in this evolving national and global context. The launch of BRICS TB Research Network under the framework of BRICS TB Cooperation Plan is a promising opportunity to strengthen cooperation and diversify the funding base. The network is a multi-stakeholder platform for collaboration among government, civil society, academia, etc., with a view of helping to push for a common research agenda with global impact. The BRICS countries are currently discussing how to develop new technologies for screening and diagnosis for MDR-TB. Private sector funding has always been inadequate in terms of TB. Recent partnership between Indian Institute of Microbial Technology under the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research with the private sector to explore potentially more effective, safer, all-oral treatment regimens to tackle MDR-TB and new molecular entities to treat all TB patients is an important initiative that provides template for further such public-private partnerships. Louis Pasteur, 150 years ago, pronounced that science and application of science are bound together like the fruit to the tree. This message needs to be revitalized. Going ahead, cutting-edge research needs to be integrated with developmental priorities to come up with measures that are affordable and accessible to where it needed the most. As resource will probably always remain limited, making correct funding choices, partnerships, and participation of all stakeholders would be crucial to derive maximum benefits for people who need it the most. I thank everybody. Thank you.